All right, so we've talked kind of at length at various times about different things involving plot and point of view, both. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of some techniques that you can use to mix it up a little bit. Um, some interesting ways you can try to maybe add some variety to the way you're telling your story or the point of view from which you're telling it. So first off, in terms of plot, something you can do to your plot to make it a little more interesting. I'm going to talk about the difference between linear narrative and non-linear narrative. Okay, so linear narrative is time-based. It's sequential order. So like this happened, which led to this, which led to this, which led to this. It's kind of like everything we've talked about before, going from point A to point B, or point A to B, then B to C, and then C to D, and so forth and so on to F and G. Okay? So that would be a linear narrative. Now, that's virtually all stories tend to follow that linear narrative. Psychologically, that's kind of just what readers kind of expect, or if you're watching a movie, what moviegoers kind of expect, that sort of thing. But not all. And it could be a very a good technique to use to kind of mix with that a little bit, and that would be a non-linear narrative. Okay, so a non-linear narrative is a story that's told out of sequence. So the events are presented in some sort of order other than the order that they actually would have happened in terms of time. Usually that could be to enhance, the mood or the tone, or maybe build up a feeling of suspense, or to provide correct plot structure. Maybe what would be the climactic event in a story arc, well, that event would have happened fairly early on in that story arc. So by presenting things out of sequence, you can kind of add to that mystery, and we present all the repercussions before we actually find out what it was that caused all of those repercussions. Right? So that would be a non-linear narrative. It's going out of sequence. Lots of people have used this to great effect. Good example is a play called Betrayal by a guy named Harold Pinter. Very famous playwright if you've never heard of him. But the scenes of the play are actually presented in reverse order. So it begins at the end of a relationship, and then it ends at the beginning. So we get to see as the climax the moment of the creation rather than the moment of the destruction. There's that episode of Seinfeld, if you've watched Seinfeld, that the entire episode was done in backwards order, exactly the same way as Betrayal. In fact, they even had one of the characters on that episode named Pinter to reference Harold Pinter for Betrayal. It definitely has made the narrative more interesting than it would have been if it had just been presented in complete sequential order. So it can be a great technique to use as you're creating your story. So that's one thing at your disposal. When you're dealing with plot, you can tell your story maybe a little bit out of sequence. Use a non-linear narrative as a means of making that plot a little more interesting, or a little more suspenseful. All right, so that's one technique you can use. Now, going over to point of view, you also have the ability to, and this is something not a lot of people use it, does not tend to happen a whole lot, but it can be very effective when done, and that is switching the perspective of the point of view in the course of the story. Switching the perspective of the narrator, telling the story from a different point of view. What if you switched in the middle of telling it? So we've already discussed the difference between them. You got first person, that's the one that uses I did this, I did that, whatever. That second person uses you, the reader's the actual character in there. Or third person, which is that kind of camera over here watching everything and then telling you, the reader, everything that happened. He did this, she did this, they ran over here, one would think, those things. Okay. But what if you saw maybe the same scene from two different perspectives, the perspective of this person and then the perspective of this person? Or what if you saw the scene between these two people from the perspective of the person over here watching it? Okay, so it can be really challenging to do it, but lots of successful works have told stories using multiple points of view. My Sister's Keeper, As I Lay Dying, Joy Luck Club, The Help, the whole Song of Fire and Ice series, because there's a whole bunch of stories that have definitely done this with great success. Now, the key to being successful with telling a story with multiple points of view is to make sure that you are being very consistent to the voice of each individual character. So you need to make sure that your characters are distinct individuals. In fact, this can be a great technique just to use to practice with, even if you don't end up using it, to make sure that you have really strong established characters, that you have a great handle on who these characters are in the course of your story. So we've got telling a story either linear or non-linear, so maybe telling a story out of sequence, and instead of just using the one point of view, possibly using multiple points of view to tell a story. And these are actually the two techniques that we're going to practice with the item that we're going to be starting today.